Hey everyone, it's Kathy Croney from Broken Roads, and I'm here today for Amy Howard at Home to show you a transformation on this desk. And I specifically angled this so that you could see what kind of shape it really is in. It's pretty rough. It actually had a leg missing when we got it too, so it's been an interesting piece all along. The top was not repairable, so my husband had to tear out the top, and he built this out of old wood. So I really love the way this looks, this top. It's definitely got a lot of character to it. It's pretty level for the most part and fairly smooth, but it definitely has a rustic feel. So I'm going to embrace that for this whole piece, all the way down to the toes on this thing. So we're going to start off with definitely clean slate all over. It is very, very dirty. Get it all cleaned up, and I'm definitely going to have to do something to the inside of all the drawers, and you know, in here it's just really needs a lot of TLC. We've got these sliders too. These are pretty cool. Scott sanded the tops of these too, so I'll be using gel stain on these, or maybe even just matte sealer to seal them out. We'll see how it goes. I definitely don't have a clear plan in mind for this piece. I want to just take it a step at a time. We're going to start with the top and then move on the way down. Because it is going to be so rustic, I want to keep everything super, super matte, have some nice iron hardware on here, I think, and just embrace that rustic farmhouse feel rather than a modern farmhouse feel. So let's get started, of course, with Clean Slate. For folks that are new to Clean Slate, this is a great product. One of the best things about it is that you don't have to go back and wipe it off once you've applied it to your piece to pull all the grime, dirt, oils, and waxes off. You just put it on with a clean, dry, lint-free rag. I like to actually, pour it over 1, 2, 3, about is what I count before I start. And then you just run it across your piece. You can use this on the inside of your drawers and doors, along all of the edges, everywhere where you're going to apply a product, a paint, a milk paint, waxes, gel stains, sealer. Before you put any of that on, you definitely want to get rid of everything that would not allow your product to adhere. This stuff works great, and then you let it dry about 10 minutes. Once it's dried, you're ready to go. This is just one wipe. See all that stuff coming off of there? This is why I use it every time, because I don't want anything to prevent my products from sticking and making this a really long-lasting lifetime piece for someone. So we'll get this all cleaned up, and then we'll start with our next step. So even on this top that my husband put on this desk, I'm going to go ahead and use Clean Slate on it, because remember I said that it does take away dust, dirt, and oils. We want to make sure this thing is completely prepped and ready for the gel stain that I'm going to put on it next. There's also these little spots that are kind of a fill-in that are white, and that would obviously stand out on the gel stain. I haven't decided yet, but I'm thinking I may put some one-step paint on those to kind of blend them in so they're not quite as obvious when it's finished. I do want rustic, but I don't want it to look tired, so I'm just trying to balance out these little imperfections with a rustic feel. So Clean Slate on my clean, dry towel, just running it over this piece. And you can see already there is plenty on there to take off. This is one of the little slider pull-out writing desk parts on here that I'm getting ready to put Clean Slate on. And also what that kind of does is help me see the grain too. I want to see what that's going to look like when I start adding some gel stain to it. That's going to be really pretty. So I got that nice and clean, and we are ready for the next step. I've finished cleaning the entire piece with Clean Slate. It's prepped and ready to go for paint now. I've waited about 10 to 15 minutes, and so the next step I'm getting ready to do is the top. I'm going to use Amy's gel stain in Hazel Mahogany and the 1.5 inch chip brush. I just like the feel of the brush in my hand. It seems to be a simpler way for me to apply. I get a pretty clean and even stroke. I typically would use a larger brush, but I want to make sure that I don't get this on too heavy, so this time I'm going to go a little bit smaller and just wipe it off a little bit at a time and make sure I like the color before I move on to the next section. So here we go. Remember, this is water-based, so your brushes clean out really easily with this gel stain, and then also it smells amazing. So there's no odor or anything like that you have to worry about. And when I go to apply it, it's pretty simple. Just put a little bit on your brush like this, and then you're going to place it on top of your piece. Run it down the board. I like to have a slightly damp towel with me sometimes, and just to be able to run across the gel stain as I'm moving along. I like this color, it looks really good. And then once this dries, I'll be able to go take a look at it, you know, from a larger perspective and see if I want to add another coat, if I want to keep it the way that it is, and move on with the matte sealer afterwards to seal the top. All right, I've finished now with my coat of Amy's Gel Stain and Hazel Mahogany, and I love how this is turning out. Again, I want to kind of feel rustic, but not tired. So it looks really, really good. I'm getting ready to put matte sealer on it at this point in time. I'm going to probably do 2 coats, maybe even 3, because I really want to keep this dull, and I want to try to avoid wax. It does give a little bit of a sheen, and I want this to be super flat. So I have Amy's matte sealer right here, and I'm using Amy's 2.5-inch chip brush to apply it. Again, you can use the nylon brushes. I like to use the chip brushes for large spaces with the sealer, with the paint. This is just my go-to brush. Everybody has a different style that they prefer to use. This goes on a little bit milky white, but dries clear. It's water-based. Your brushes wash out really well, really easily. And I would say the first coat safely after about an hour to 2, depending on your humidity. You can go ahead and then add the second coat and so forth until you get the look that you like. So I'm just applying this to the piece to protect the gel stain that I have put on this top. It does dry pretty fast, so I've said this more than once, but you just need to keep in mind, once you put it on there, don't try to go over it too many times. Let it dry, and if you missed a place, you can just go back over it with your second coat, or if you need to just touch it up after a first coat, you can use your brush lightly to do that as well. Get this finished up and then move on to the next step, which is going to be the base. While I'm waiting for the matte sealer to dry so that I can add the second coat, I wanted to show you the inside of these drawers that are part of the desk. They are in really, really rough shape, and by the time I get finished with them, getting them all cleaned up and adding gel stain to the inside and conditioning them with some wax, they are going to look like night and day. So I thought I would just share with you what this looks like now. And we'll see the transformation here in just a little bit. I finished with 2 coats of Amy's matte sealer on this top, which was gel stained with Hazel Mahogany. It looks great. It's still very matte, which is exactly what I wanted. I may do a 3rd coat down the line, but for now I'm pretty happy with the results. The next step is the 1-step paint. Now I originally wanted to choose the color Barnboard. I don't know, I just thought it was clever. Barnboard top, barnboard color. But the undertone in the paint just didn't quite complement the top very well. So instead I'm using Stoneware in the 1-step paint. It's a really nice neutral, kind of a little bit of an off gray, I would think, undertone in the white. That's just what it looks like to me. Anyway, I'm going to do 2 coats on this all the way around and on all the drawers. And then the next step after that will be gel stain and do some edging probably on the sides to kind of give this a rustic feel. I'm going to show you how to edge it instead of sanding it with paint so that you can actually keep the integrity of the piece and then not have to sand off corners and things like that. You can just use your paint to do the same technique. I'm going to use both Amy's chip brushes for this paint part. I'm going to use the 1.5-inch and the 2.5-inch chip brush. I just, again, really like these brushes with my paint. And now I know nylon brushes work really well too, just depending on what kind of outcome you're looking for. But with this particular project, with most of my projects, I really enjoyed the chip brushes, and so that's what I'm going to use on this. Let's get started. When you're applying one-step paint, you want to make sure that you put on thin coats. So take your time and just put on a couple of thin, even coats to your pieces. You know, let it dry in between really well, and then you can add on your next coat. This allows a couple of things to happen. One is that you get a rather even finish when you do this, and also it keeps your paint from cracking. So oftentimes what will happen is if you get too thick of paint applied to your pieces, it will fissure or crack, and then you have to sand that down and reapply your paint again. So just remember 2 thin coats with drying time between, and then move on to your next step. I've now finished with 2 coats of one-step paint and stoneware on the drawers and on the base of this desk. So the next step I'm going to do is just a technique of dry brushing on these little edges and corners of the drawers and parts of the desk to give that worn look with actually not sanding it down. This is a great option if you don't want to ruin the integrity of the shape of a piece. And it's my go-to most of the time. I don't like to sand very often unless I really have to, or if it's in really bad shape and it actually would help it rather than hurt it. So this is the way that I do it. I want to just take a little bit of paint that's going to be slightly darker than my glaze, and we're going to do the glazing next, but I want to show you this paint color first. So this one here that I've chosen for all of the edges is graphite. And graphite is just like a medium brown. It kind of has a green undertone to it, I think, for me. But I just put a little bit of paint on the brush, just like this, not very much at all, and of course I wipe it off. And then I'm just going to take it and run it sideways across the edges of this drawer on the corners. So just like this, I'm just going to run it down here sideways. Just like that. And you don't have to go like every corner and make it perfect. It's actually better if you miss some spots, create gaps in the worn look with the paint. And if you get a little bit extra on in a spot here and there, it's a little bit messier, that's okay too. Makes it look more natural. And so see, you can see here, this is kind of what it looks like when you're finished. And after this dries, on all of the corners that I put the accents on, I'm going to glaze it. That'll be the next step. Now just remember that dry brushing is a very subtle technique. You use very little paint. In fact, you should knock most of the paint off of your brush, just barely dip it in there and then offload it, and then take the side of the brush just to hit the corners where you want it to be, to look a little bit worn when you're finished with your glazing. So when you add the glazing to the top of this, it won't be such a stark difference. You'll see the glazing over it, and then this will kind of lightly poke through as opposed to looking like a brown and a white right now. So next step is the glaze. If you're new to glazing, I would recommend that you do a practice board first. I tell people that all the time. The most important thing to know about it is that you just have to find your own technique. So I would paint a board, the color that I'm using on the base of whatever piece I'm working on. After that's dried, 2 coats at least. Then I would put my glaze on it and see how it turns out. If I need to make it a little darker, I can adjust it at that time. If it needs to be a little thinner or a little lighter, I can add more water to it, or more glazed over to it if it needs more drying time. So the mixture for the glaze is 3 ingredients, 1 to 1 to 1. And that's water, glazed over, and one-step paint for this particular piece. The one-step paint that I'm going to use is Park Avenue, and then I have the glazed over and water. And those 3 together is really the basic foundation for glaze that you can use on any piece. I do tend to add a little bit more water or glaze, just like I said, depending on what kind of look I want in the end. My practice board is where I figure out that ratio, and then I go from there. So I've mixed this together, and I have added 1 to 1 to 1 here, and it's a little bit thin. You know, paint, obviously chalk paint, the one-step paint is obviously a little bit thick, so this is what it looks like when you add the mixture together, a little bit runny. I'm going to take this along with my chip brushes, the 1.5 inch and the 2.5 inch chip brushes, and I am going to apply it with the brush and then immediately wipe off with a clean, dry, lint-free rag. I do that and work in small spaces just to get the effect that I want. I'm going to start with the drawers and then I'll go to the body of the piece after that. So let's get started. Another thing you want to remember is to consistently keep your glaze stirred because it will tend to separate if you let it sit for too long. So just every couple of applications, just give it a little whirl before you start applying it again. So I'm adding a little bit of glaze to my brush, just like this. A little bit goes a long way. And I have my clean, lint-free dry rag here. And I'm just going to apply it like this. As you can see, it goes on kind of sheer, a little bit sheer, and then working quickly, just wipe it off. I kind of like to go with the original grain, if there was one, on my piece, you know, just to make sure that it looks natural, and I'm going with the flow of the piece itself rather than up and down. On the drawer I would go sideways because it makes more sense the way it visually looks. And after this dries, it will darken just a tiny bit, and then we're going to add matte sealer to the end. Okay, just a couple more steps and we'll be finished with this desk. The last thing I'm going to apply is Amy's matte sealer to the entire base of this piece. We did 2 coats to the top after we put on the Hazel Mahogany gel stain, and I'm getting ready to put it over the glazed portion of the desk. I also am really glad that I went ahead and added the gel stain to the feet on this desk rather than painting them, because I really think it ties them in well with the top. So they just turned out lovely. I'm glad that we went that direction. All right, so we're gonna add this onto it, let it dry, put the hardware back on, and it will be ready to hopefully find its way into a new home. All right, we're finished now. I stayed in that same vein of just the farmhouse feel, very traditional. Nothing super modern about this at all. I think because the legs were so unique and had such a great shape, I wanted to kind of stay in that style and honor, you know, the traditional sense of a farmhouse feel. So it is ready for a new home. It was a pleasure today to share with you guys this transformation, and I look forward to seeing you again. Have a great week.